She finally walks out of the castle, done with servitude and cruelty, only to find the vampire king waiting at the gate. He isn't there to drag her back, but to offer a dangerous bargain, freedom in exchange for a secret tied to her blood. The moment she steps outside, she realizes this meeting was never a coincidence. It was fate closing in. I almost didn't write this down because it still feels like a dream I'm afraid to wake from. But some nights leave fingerprints on your heart and you carry them forever. The last bell in Ravenspire Castle had barely stopped trembling when Mara slipped through the servants' corridor with her coat folded under one arm and her shoes in her hand. The stone floor was cold enough to sting, and the air smelled of candle smoke and rain-soaked ivy. Behind her, the castle breathed the way old places do, quiet, watchful, as if the walls remembered every whispered prayer and every swallowed sob. Mara had been the new maid for nearly a year, which meant she was invisible until something went wrong. She had learned how to move without sound, how to keep her eyes lowered, how to swallow the small humiliations that came with living under a roof owned by legends. People in the village spoke of the vampire king with the same voice they used for storms, respectful, afraid, and certain you couldn't argue with him. Yet what Mara feared most wasn't fangs or shadows. It was the slow, shrinking feeling of being used up day by day until nothing of her belonged to her anymore. Tonight, she chose herself. She found the side gate by memory, guided by moonlight and stubbornness. The iron bars were slick with mist, and the hinges gave a soft groan that sounded too loud in the sleeping dark. Beyond the gate, the forest road waited, black trees stitched together by silver fog, a path that promised danger but also something rarer, a life she could name as her own. Mara's breath turned white as she stepped onto the gravel, and she almost laughed from the shock of it. Freedom didn't feel like victory. It felt like fear with a heartbeat. Then a figure moved in the fog, and her laughter died before it could be born. He stood just outside the open gate as if he had been carved there, a man in a dark coat embroidered with faded gold thread, his pale hair catching the moon like a blade catching light. His eyes were an impossible blue, calm, bright, and heavy with something older than anger. Mara had seen portraits of him in the gallery, all stern jaw and royal distance. In real life, he looked less like a monster and more like a person who had forgotten how to rest. The vampire king didn't raise his voice. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't even step forward. Mara, he said quietly, and the way he spoke her name made her stomach twist because it sounded like he had practiced it. Mara's fingers tightened around her coat. "My lord," she managed, though she didn't curtsy. "Not tonight. I'm leaving." A long pause stretched between them, filled with the drip of water from the gate and the far-off hush of the trees. The king's gaze dropped not to her face but to her wrist, where the cuff of her sleeve had slid back, revealing a thin, old scar. Mara covered it instinctively, heat rising to her cheeks. That scar wasn't from the castle. It was from before, from a life she never spoke about, from a promise she'd made to herself to stop being someone else's solution. "I know," the king said, and his voice held no accusation, only certainty. "That is why I came." Mara's heart hammered. She took a step back, the gravel crunching under her heel. "To stop me." His expression tightened just slightly, like a man holding a door against a storm. "To warn you." "Warn me about what?" Her words came sharper than she intended. "The world outside, hunger, wolves. I've survived worse than wolves." The king's eyes flickered, as if something in her answer struck a nerve he tried not to show. "There are men on the road tonight," he said. "Not my men. They wear sunlight on their banners and call it virtue. They are looking for a girl who ran from Ravenspire." Mara felt the blood drain from her face. "No one knows I'm leaving." "They do," he replied, and the fog seemed to thicken around his shoulders. "Because someone sold your name for a handful of coin." A cold wave of betrayal rolled through her, so sudden it almost knocked her breath away. Faces flashed in her mind, other servants, tired smiles, careful kindnesses that might have been masks. She had been invisible but not unseen, not to everyone. Mara swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Then let them come, I won't crawl back inside." The king's gaze softened, and for the first time she saw it, something almost human beneath the legend, something like respect. "You think I'm asking you to return," he said. I'm not. He reached into his coat slowly, deliberately, the way you do when you don't want to frighten a wounded animal. Mara's muscles tensed, ready to run. But he drew out not a weapon, not a chain, not a threat, only a small object wrapped in black cloth. He held it out, palm up, without crossing the threshold of the gate. "I'll take this," he said. Mara didn't move. The knight seemed to lean closer, listening. "What is it?" she whispered. The king hesitated, and that hesitation scared her more than any sudden motion. His jaw flexed like he was choosing truth over ease. "It's the only thing I have left that still belongs to the man I used to be," he said, "and it may keep you alive." Mara stared at the cloth-wrapped bundle, her mind racing. Why would a king, an immortal ruler the village taught children to fear, stand guard for a maid who wanted nothing to do with him? Why did his voice sound like he had carried loneliness for centuries and was finally setting it down just for a moment at her feet? "I don't understand," Mara said, and she hated how small her voice sounded. "I know," he answered, softer now, "but you will." A gust of wind threaded through the iron gate, lifting Mara's hair and making the fog swirl. Somewhere down the road, a faint metallic clink echoed, boots striking stone, not close enough to see but close enough to hear. Mara's stomach clenched. The king turned his head slightly, listening, and for the first time a flicker of urgency broke through his calm. "Mara," he said, and there was a plea in it he couldn't quite hide. "If you step onto that road without this, they will take you. And if they take you, they will learn what you are." Mara's breath caught in her throat. "What I am," she repeated, stunned. "I'm just." The king's eyes held hers, unblinking, unbearably gentle. "No," he said as the footsteps grew louder in the fog, "you are not." And with the night closing in and danger waking on the road, Mara finally reached for the black cloth, only to feel the king flinch, as if her touch hurt him more than any blade ever could. The cloth felt warmer than it should have, like it had been against someone's skin for a long time. Mara's fingers closed around it, and a faint scent rose, old leather, cedar, and something like rain on iron. The vampire king didn't let go right away. For a single breath, his hand stayed beneath hers, steadying her the way you steady someone stepping off a ledge. Down the road, the footsteps multiplied, not running yet, just confident, measured, as if the night belonged to them. "Open it," the king murmured. Mara peeled back the cloth with shaking hands. Inside lay a ring, simple, worn gold, not jeweled, not showy. The kind a man might have once worn to remind himself he was loved. Etched into the inner band was a name in a language she didn't recognize, but the letters looked softened by years of touch. "It's ordinary," she whispered, confused. "It was mine before I was a king," he said. His voice tightened, almost like he regretted each word as soon as it left him. "Before the castle, before the hunger, before the stories people tell to scare their children into obedience." Mara looked up. The fog thinned just enough for her to see the line of his throat, the stillness of his mouth, the careful control. He was too composed for a monster and too lonely for a tyrant. "What does it do?" she asked. "It tells the truth about you," he replied, "and it tells the truth about me." The footsteps were close now, and a lantern glow pulsed between the trees. Mara's pulse turned sharp and loud in her ears. "Come inside," the king said, motioning toward the open gate, toward the castle she had sworn never to enter again. "Not to keep you, to protect you." Mara's whole body rebelled at the thought. The castle meant endless corridors, locked doors, and being small on purpose. Yet the road meant men with virtue on their banners and a betrayal she still couldn't name. "I don't trust you," she said, forcing the words out. He held her gaze, and something vulnerable flickered across his face, so fast she might have imagined it. "Good," he answered quietly. "Trust is not a gift, it's built." A voice called from the fog. "In the name of the sunlit order, open the gate." Mara's breath hitched. The vampire king did not move like a predator. He moved like a shield being raised. "You can run," he said, low enough that only she could hear, "but you'll run alone." The lantern light swelled brighter. Mara looked at the road, then at the iron gate, then at the ring in her palm, an ordinary thing that suddenly felt like a decision. She stepped back through the gate. The king's shoulders released a fraction, as if he had been holding something heavy for too long. He turned his head toward the approaching men, and when he spoke, his voice carried, calm, regal, and strangely tired. This gate does not open for you," he said. The lantern light stopped. There was a silence that felt like a blade hovering midair. Then the voice in the fog replied, cold and certain, "We don't need the gate, Your Majesty. We already have what opens it." Mara's fingers tightened around the ring as fear ran ice cold through her veins, because the voice wasn't unfamiliar. It belonged to someone who worked inside the castle. They didn't have time to argue. The king led Mara through a side passage that smelled of wet stone and rosemary, as if someone had tried to bless the air and failed. Their footsteps were swallowed by thick rugs and old dust. Somewhere above, a bell began to ring, slow, deliberate, not an alarm for fire, but a warning meant for things that listened. Mara clutched the ring so hard the edge pressed into her skin. She kept waiting for the king to turn, to lock a door behind them, to remind her that she'd traded one cage for another. But he never touched her. He didn't even walk too close. He moved with a strange humility for someone called king, as if he'd learned long ago that power was loud enough without being forced into someone's personal space. They reached a small chamber lit by a single lamp. No lavish paintings, no gold, just a table, a cracked mirror, and a wooden chair that looked used, recently used. The king closed the door and leaned his forehead against it for a moment, eyes shut, like someone bracing for pain. "You know that voice," he said without turning. Mara swallowed. "It's Mrs. Alder," she whispered, "the housekeeper, the woman who taught Mara which herbs soothed burns, which hallways creaked, which words to never say around certain guests. She was kind to me." The king turned slowly. His face held no satisfaction, no "I told you so," only a quiet sorrow. "Kindness and desperation sometimes share the same hands," he said. "She lost her son to a fever. The order promised her a cure that doesn't exist." Mara's throat tightened with anger she didn't know where to put. "So I'm the payment," she said. "No," the king replied, sharper now, and the air seemed to tighten around the syllable. "You are the excuse." He stepped toward the table and gestured to the cracked mirror. "Put on the ring, then look." Mara hesitated. She expected some trick, some spell to bind her to him. But the king's eyes were steady, almost pleading, as if he needed her to see something before the night swallowed her whole. She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her hand. Mara faced the mirror. At first she saw only herself, pale from fear, hair loose from her cap, eyes too wide. Then the glass shivered. The lamplight bent strangely, as if the mirror had become water. And Mara saw the scar on her wrist glow faintly, not bright, not magical in a theatrical way. It looked like ember under ash. The old mark she'd hidden for years answered to the ring like a locked door recognizing a key. Her breath left her in a rush. "What is that?" The king's voice softened. "A seal," he said, "a promise made long before you were born." Mara's mind spun. "I'm not important," she whispered, as if saying it could make it true again. "I scrub floors, I fold sheets, You endure," the king interrupted gently. "And you choose mercy even when no one rewards you for it. That is not small." Outside the chamber, a heavy thud echoed through the corridor. Then another, the sound of iron being struck, measured, patient. They weren't storming the castle. They were performing a ritual like men certain the world would applaud them no matter what they broke. Mara looked at the king, ring trembling on her finger. "Tell me what I am," she demanded, voice breaking. He opened his mouth, then froze. The bell above them changed tone. The warning note became something else, a deep, strained sound that meant a boundary had been crossed. The king's eyes went wide with a rare human fear. "They found the old passage," he whispered. And the mirror, still rippling, showed something moving behind Mara's reflection, something not in the room with them. A shadow stepped forward in the glass and raised a hand to touch the other side. Mara stumbled back from the mirror, heart slamming, and the king moved between her and the glass without thinking, an instinctive protection that didn't match the stories told about him. He swept a cloth over the mirror, covering it like you cover a wound. It can't take you through the glass, he said, voice tight, but it can watch, and watching is how fear learns your shape. Mara's hands shook. What was that? The order's devotion, he replied bitterly. When it has nothing left to worship, it worships the hunt. He guided her through another corridor, narrow, half forgotten. The castle felt different here. Less royal, more human. A chipped statue of a saint stood with a candle burned down to its last nub. Someone had left fresh flowers at its feet. Well, you did that, Mara said, surprised. The king didn't deny it. Sometimes I light a candle for the people my name has frightened, he said quietly. It is a small thing. Small things are all I'm allowed. They reached a heavy door banded with iron. The king placed his palm against it, and Mara expected magic. Instead, she heard the soft click of a key turning. He opened the door into a room that smelled like parchment and smoke-dried herbs. Books lined the walls, histories, maps, letters tied with ribbon. This wasn't a treasure room, it was a room for remembering. On a table lay a faded drawing of a young woman with Mara's eyes. Mara's breath caught. Who is that? The king's voice dropped to something almost reverent. Eloan, he said, the last gatekeeper, the one who ended the first war between the Order and my kind. Mara stared. The woman in the sketch wore a bracelet that looked exactly like the scar on Mara's wrist, only intact, like a band rather than a wound. That's not possible, Mara whispered. The king's gaze stayed on the drawing like it hurt to look. You were born into a line of peacemakers, he said, a line the order pretends never existed because peace does not make good hymns. Mara's anger flared hot and shaky. So that's why you're doing this, she accused. You need me. The ring, the scar, some gate, some seal, this is just another way to use me. The king's jaw tightened, but he didn't lash out. He looked tired in a way that came from carrying centuries of consequences. I do need you, he said, and the honesty of it landed like a bruise, but not for my power. He reached for a letter on the table and slid it toward her. His handwriting was precise, controlled, as if he feared what would happen if the lines wavered. Mara read the first line and felt her stomach drop. It was a confession. Not of murder, not of cruelty, but of surrender. The king wrote of a curse bound to his crown. As long as he ruled, the war would never end. The order would always come. His people would always retaliate. The castle would always demand a monster to blame. At the bottom was a final sentence that made Mara's eyes burn. If a gatekeeper ever returns, I will give back the night. Mara looked up, voice raw. You want me to unmake you? He nodded once. I want you to live in a world where you are not hunted for what is in your blood, he said, and I want my people to stop hiding their gentleness like it is a crime. A crash echoed somewhere above, wood splintering, men shouting. The order was inside now. Mara's fear spiked. Then we have to go, she whispered. The king's face hardened, not with violence, but with resolve. He took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders like a shield. Stay close, he said, and whatever happens, do not let them convince you that mercy is weakness. They moved through a secret stairwell. The air grew colder as they descended, and the sound of the intruders grew louder behind them. At the bottom, an old door stood half buried in stone, carved with symbols that matched the shape of Mara's scar. The king turned to her, eyes intense. This is the gate your blood remembers, he said, and it will not open for me. Mara placed her trembling hand on the carving. The stone pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat waking up. Behind them, voices spilled into the stairwell, close enough to hear words now. Give us the girl, Mrs. Alder shouted, her voice cracked and desperate. Give her to us and we leave the castle standing. Mara's hand stayed on the door, but her heart split in two. Because in that moment, she realized the cliff she stood on wasn't stone. It was a choice. Mara turned from the door and faced the stairwell, her chest tight as if the air had become too heavy to breathe. She could run. She could open the gate and disappear into whatever waited below. That was the old instinct. Survive first, feel later. But the king's coat on her shoulders still held warmth, and warmth is a dangerous thing when you've lived too long without it. It makes you want to be worthy. The footsteps above slowed. A lantern glow spilled down the stairs and shapes gathered at the top, men in pale cloaks, metal badges catching the light, faces lit with righteous certainty. At their center stood Mrs. Alder, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles shone. When she saw Mara, her eyes filled with tears that looked real. "Mara," she called, voice shaking. "I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do." Mara wanted to hate her. Hatred would have been simpler. Hatred would have made the world feel clean and divided. "What did they promise you?" Mara asked instead, and her voice broke on the last word. Mrs. Alder flinched. "A cure," she whispered. "For my boy, I know he's gone, but they said holy light can call a soul back if the sacrifice is pure." Mara felt sick, not because of the order's superstition, but because she could see the trap inside it, grief dressed up as hope. The leader of the cloaked men stepped forward. His smile was gentle in the way a blade can be gentle before it cuts. "Girl," he called down, "you have been living in darkness. You don't know what you are. Come with us. We will cleanse you and you will be celebrated." The king stood one step behind Mara, silent, letting her be the one to decide. That more than anything unsettled her. Monsters snatched choices away. This king was offering hers back. Mara lifted her ringed hand so they could see it. "You don't want to cleanse me," she said, voice steadier now. "You want to use me." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You wear his ring." Mara swallowed. "I wear a reminder," she replied, surprised by her own courage. "That people can change, that power can kneel, that a king can choose to lose." A murmur rippled through the order's men, doubts small but alive. The leader's smile slipped. "Do not listen," he warned them. "She is charmed." The king finally spoke, his voice low and resonant in the stone stairwell. "If you believe you are righteous," he said, "then be brave enough to look at the truth without flinching." He stepped forward into the lantern light, not threatening, not looming, just present. His eyes were calm, and somehow that calm was more powerful than any snarl. "I have fed on no human in this castle for many decades," he said. "I have kept my court from your villages. I have punished my own who broke that law." The leader scoffed, "Lies." The king's gaze moved to Mrs. Alder. "Ask your own heart," he said gently. "Has this castle hunted you, or have you hunted it?" Mrs. Alder trembled, tears spilling. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Mara like a drowning woman looking at shore. Mara's throat tightened. She took a step up the stairs toward the people who had betrayed her. The king's hand lifted as if to stop her, then lowered again. He let her go. Mara faced Mrs. Alder at the boundary of lantern light. "I don't hate you," Mara whispered, and the truth of it made her eyes burn. "But I won't be your sacrifice, and I won't be their weapon." Mrs. Alder's sob broke loose. "Then what do I do?" she cried. "What do I do with this grief?" Mara reached out and took the older woman's shaking hands. It was the smallest act, no spell, no sword, just human contact in a cold place. "You carry it," Mara said softly, "and you let it change you into someone kinder, not someone crueler." The leader's face twisted with anger. "Enough," he snapped. "Seize her." The order surged forward. And the king, still refusing to kill, still refusing to become the monster they needed, moved like a storm contained in a single breath. He lifted one hand and struck the stone wall beside the stairs, not to break bone, not to spill blood. The castle answered him. A heavy iron grate slammed down between Mara and the order with a deafening clang, cutting the stairwell in two. Lantern light flickered behind the bars, faces shocked and furious. Mara stumbled back, heart pounding. The king's breathing had changed, faster now, strained, as if holding back his strength cost him something. They'll find another way, Mara whispered, terrified. The king nodded once, eyes already turning toward the carved door below. Yes, he said, and next time they won't come with lanterns, they'll come with fire and songs. Mara's hand flew to her wrist scar. The ring felt heavier, like it knew the moment had arrived. The king looked at her, not commanding, not pleading, just trusting. If you open that door, he said quietly, everything you believed about yourself will be rewritten. Mara placed her palm on the carving again. This time the stone grew warm. And somewhere deep beneath the castle, something ancient exhaled, like the world itself had been holding its breath, waiting for her permission to breathe again. The door didn't swing open like a normal door. It softened. The stone turned almost liquid beneath Mara's palm, rippling outward in slow circles as if the castle remembered how to become a path. A cool wind rose from the opening, not the damp chill of a cellar, but a clean air that smelled like frost and wildflowers. Mara blinked hard, stunned by the scent of morning in a place that had always tasted like night. The king stood beside her, very still. "What is it?" Mara asked, voice barely there. "The Mercy Gate," he said. The words sounded like a prayer he didn't quite believe he deserved to say. It was built to end wars without ending lives. Mara stepped through first, the coat still around her shoulders, the ring warm on her finger. The passage beyond wasn't a tunnel. It was a corridor of pale stone that shimmered faintly, lit by a light with no visible source, soft, kind, steady. The air hummed, not loudly, but like a lullaby felt more than heard. Behind her the king followed, and Mara felt it immediately. He was in pain. Not dramatic, not collapsing, just a subtle tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders tightened as if every step asked him to confront something he'd been avoiding for centuries. "Mara," he said carefully, "if you want to turn back, you still can." She looked at him. In the gentle light, he seemed less like a legend and more like a man standing at the edge of a confession. "You're afraid," she realized. His eyes lowered. "I am," he admitted, "because this gate will not simply free you from them, it will demand a price from me." Mara's heart squeezed. What price? He swallowed, and when he spoke his voice was quiet enough to feel like a secret. "It will take the crown's curse off my people," he said, "but it will also take my immortality, my strength, the night that has held me together." Mara stared at him, stunned. "You'll become human." "Well, if the gate accepts me," he said, "yes." 1,000 questions crowded Mara's throat, but one stood above the rest, simple, aching, and honest. "Do you want that?" she asked. The king's gaze met hers. For the first time, he looked young, not in years, but in expression, like someone allowing himself to want something without punishing himself for it. "I want to stop being the reason children are taught to fear the dark," he said. "I want to be a man who can stand in daylight without shame." The corridor ended in an archway carved with the same symbols as Mara's scar. Beyond it lay a clearing that shouldn't have existed beneath Ravenspire, a bowl of earth and white stone open to the sky. Above, dawn waited behind a veil of cloud, the horizon paling. Mara heard distant shouting from the castle above. The Order had found another route. Their voices were muffled, but the certainty in them carried even through stone. Mara stepped into the clearing. The air tasted of wet grass and beginnings. She held up her ringed hand, and the scar on her wrist warmed as if answering sunlight that hadn't fully arrived yet. "What do I do?" she whispered. The king stood at the archway, not crossing into the open. "You choose," he said simply. "Gatekeepers do not command, they consent." Mara's chest tightened. All her life people had taken her labor, her silence, her dignity, her choices. Even the Order wanted to take her, dress it up as purity, call it honor, and still take. She looked back at the king. He had every power to force her. He didn't. In that moment, Mara understood something that felt like a hand closing around her heart, not to squeeze, but to steady. Courage isn't loud. Courage is deciding you won't become cruel just because the world keeps offering you cruelty as a tool. Mara lifted her chin and spoke into the clearing, voice shaking but true. "I open this gate," she said, "for peace." The symbols in the stone lit softly like dawn under snow. The ring on her finger grew hot, then cooled as if it had released something it had carried for too long. The king took a step forward. The first edge of sunlight broke through the clouds and touched the clearing like a blessing. Mara's breath caught. She expected him to recoil, to burn, to vanish into legend. Oh, he didn't. He stopped, eyes squeezed shut, face tight with pain, but it was the pain of change, not destruction. His shoulders trembled, and then slowly his breathing steadied. The blue in his eyes softened, becoming less unreal, more human. Color warmed his cheeks as if life was returning to a place it had abandoned long ago. He opened his eyes and looked at his own hands, as if he couldn't believe they were still his. A sound came from the archway behind them, boots skidding, a furious gasp. The order had arrived at the threshold of the clearing, barred by the same symbols that glowed around Mara. The leader stared at the king standing in dawnlight. His certainty faltered for the first time. "That's impossible," he whispered. Mara turned to face them, coat still around her shoulders like a quiet crown. Her fear was still there, but it no longer owned her. She stepped between the men and the newly human king. "You wanted a monster," Mara said, voice steady, "because monsters make your world simple. But he chose mercy, and I chose not to be your sacrifice." Mrs. Alder appeared behind the leader, her face wet with tears, eyes wide with what she was witnessing. Her hands rose to her mouth, and she shook her head slowly, as if something inside her had finally broken open. The leader's voice turned harsh, desperate. "Step aside, girl." Mara didn't move. "No," she said, "go home, carry your grief, let it make you kinder." The clearing held its breath. Then, impossibly, one of the Order's men lowered his lantern. Another took off his badge and let it fall into the grass. The sound was small, but it landed like thunder. Mrs. Alder stepped forward to the glowing boundary and pressed her palm against it, gentle, reverent. "My boy is gone," she whispered, voice trembling, "and I can't bargain him back from the world. I see that now." Her eyes lifted to Mara. "I'm sorry," she said again, but this time the apology didn't ask to be forgiven. It simply existed like truth. Mara nodded once, tears slipping free. "I know," she whispered. Behind Mara, the former king took a shaky breath, one that sounded like a person learning to live in their own body again. Mara turned, and he looked at her with something fierce and grateful and unbearably tender. "Oh, you gave me back the day," he said. Mara shook her head, voice thick. "You gave me back my choice," she replied. "I just used it." Above the clearing, the sun rose fully, spilling gold across the grass, the stone, the faces of everyone who had come here to hunt or to hide. For the first time, the castle's shadow didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a past. The gate's symbols dimmed to a gentle glow, like embers settling after a long night. And as the world finally, truly brightened, Mara realized the story wasn't ending. It was beginning, because now she had to decide what freedom meant when she wasn't running anymore, and what a former vampire king could become when he had nothing left to rule except his own heart.